Alright everybody, here's story 3 of my Pokemon story. Just relax and enjoy. Here we go. Meet Team Rocket. The next morning I had woken up to Eevee and Weepinbell next to me in my room. There was a knock on my door. I said, "Come in." The door opened. I was surprised to see my dad come in. "Dad?" I said, shocked. My dad came in with the biggest smile on his face and said, "My boy is all grown up." I didn't really care as I rolled my eyes. My dad looked at Eevee and Weepinbell and said, "I see you and Eevee are getting along quite well, and I see you caught a Weepinbell for your first Pokemon." I said, "Yup," annoyingly. That's when Terrence and Trey came into the room. They both looked shocked as they saw my father. Trey started, "Are, are you Mr. Whalen?" My dad laughed. "Ha ha, yes sir I am." Terrence even got excited. "I heard trainers go home crying after you all the time." My dad smiled and said, "Well, it takes a lot to become a trainer. My gym will show you if you got what it takes." Trey had a smirk on his face as he said, "I can take it, and I want to challenge you to a gym battle." My dad looked at me and then back at Trey. "How many gym badges have you won? How do you have?" Trey said, "You will be my first one." My dad said, "I'm one of the hardest gym leaders." Trey, still with a smirk on his face, said, "I don't care. I can still beat you." In the background, I was waving my hands trying to tell him to stop it. Terrence said with a smart tone, "This should be quick." Before my dad could say anything, the butler had came in and said, "Breakfast is served." My dad said, "Well, before I beat you, let's eat." Terrence, my dad, and the butler walked out of my room. I started to walk out when Trey grabbed my shoulder. "Where can I catch a water Pokemon at?" he asked. I said, "There is a pond out back that my dad teaches kids how to catch Pokemon. Why, are you not hungry?" Trey shook his head no and said, "I really want to beat your dad today." I looked at him and said, "Trey, you might as well wait when I face him. You know you will not beat him." Trey said, "I can take him." I said, "Whatever, kid, good luck." Trey ran off. I thought to myself, how is he going to catch a water Pokemon with a fire and ground type? I didn't want to think about it much as I was hungry. I walked into the kitchen. I could hear my dad and Terrence laughing. I could smell the bacon, scrambled eggs, sausage, and toast all just at my dad's sandwich. My dad looked at me and said, "Son, come in, eat with us." I said, "That's what I planned on doing." I sat down and started getting my plate together and pouring syrup all over it. My dad asked, "Aren't we missing one? Where is your friend?" I said, "I don't know, trying to catch a water Pokemon, I guess." My dad opened his eyes as if he just remembered something. "Speaking of water Pokemon," he reached into his pocket and pulled out a Pokeball. "Here you go, son. This is for you." He threw the Pokeball as I caught it. He looked at me and said, "Why don't you go find your friend while I set up the gym up?" The butler said, "You mean while I set the gym up, sir?" Terrence started laughing. My dad said, "Yeah, yeah." Terrence said, "I will go and get our stuff together." I nodded and walked out, wondering what kind of Pokemon I had. I had came outside to find Trey there. He was near the water with his Charmander and Diglett out. I put my hand on my head, thinking how dumb he was. A ground and fire are weak against water type Pokemon. I went over to him and said, "Trey, are you serious?" I surprised him as he turned around and looked at me. "What?" He said, I said, "You can't catch a water Pokemon with a ground and fire type." He squinched his face up like I was stupid and said, "Watch me." Soon enough, a shadow came from the water. It was a, it was big too. I said nervously, "Trey, what have you been doing?" He said, "Trying to catch those over there." He pointed to a bunch of Poliwag. The water splashed up and out came a Poliwhirl. Trey said, "Cool," as he pulled out his Pokedex and it said Poliwhirl, the tadpole Pokemon, capable of living in or out of water. When out of water, it sweats to keep its body slimy. It looked mad as it did Hydro Pump and knocked Trey to the ground. Trey, drenched in water, said, "Oh yeah, I started to get my new Pokemon out." Trey said, "No, I got this. Let's go, Charmander." Charmander stepped up, ready to go. The Poliwhirl used Hydro Pump. Trey yelled, "Quick, dodge it, and use Scratch." It was a direct hit, but it didn't phase Poliwhirl. The Poliwhirl started doing Bubble Beam. Ember, Charmander popped all the bubbles, creating steam. Trey yelled, "Keep a lookout, buddy." Charmander looked around when the Poliwhirl came and punched Charmander in the face. Charmander came flying back to Trey. I quickly threw a Pokeball my dad gave me and said, "Go, Pokemon!" Out came a tentacle. Trey said, "No, Isaiah, I got this." I jumped up and yelled, "I got a tentacle!" The Poliwhirl still looked at mad as it got ready to do Hydro Pump again. Trey yelled, "Charmander!" In concern, I yelled, "Quick, Tentacle, use Poison's thing." Tentacle blocked the Hydro Pump with... Trey said, "Okay, quick, Charmander, use Ember, go." The move hit Poliwhirl, but it wasn't effective. Poliwhirl balled his fist up and tried to hit Charmander. Trey yelled, "Charmander, bite his fist!" Charmander bit his fist. Poliwhirl tried to shake off Charmander. Trey yelled again, "Quick, Charmander, Ember!" It was a direct hit. Poliwhirl was getting up. Trey threw the Pokeball. We waited as the Pokeball shook once, then twice, as we waited for the last shake. To confirm the catch, it seemed to take forever. The Pokeball finally settled. Trey was in shock. He walked over to the Pokeball and picked it up. With much excitement, said, "Yes, I got another Pokemon." I returned Tentacle and said, "A strong one at that." Trey held the Pokeball in his hand and said, "It's time." I looked at Trey and said, "Trey, come on, you're not going to beat my dad." Trey looked at me and said, "Watch me." "Who's that Pokemon?" "It's Starmie." We went back inside and ran into the butler. The butler had a smile on his face as he said, "Can I help you boys?" Before I could speak, Trey said, "Can you heal my Pokemon?" The butler smiled again and said, "Absolutely, sir. In the meantime, check out my shiny Cloyster in the aquarium." Trey asked in question, "A shiny?" I said, "They are Pokemon with a different color that's not average." Trey got excited and said, "Let's go." We both ran into the next room, the butler's room. His room had a huge tank as a wall. In the tank, a lonely blue Cloyster. Its shell was closed up, not showing its face. I was disappointed. I really wanted to see his face. Trey, frustrated, said, "It's dumb. It's a dumb Pokemon." I said, "I remember when it was just a shelter." The door opened as we turned to see the butler had came in with 3 Pokeballs. He said, "Master Trey, is it?" Trey said, "Yes." The butler handed him his Pokemon and said, "Master Waylon is ready for you." Trey looked at me as I shook my head. Trey looked at his Pokeballs and said, "Okay, let's do this." The butler said, "Splendid. Right this way." As we walked down the hall, I whispered in Trey's ear, "Psst, do you want to borrow my Tentacle?" Trey said, "No, I'm getting my first gym badge today." We got to the door with the water sign on it. The butler started to open the door. Trey yelled, "Wait!" The butler stopped as Trey reached into his pocket and chose out Poliwhirl. His Poliwhirl had his eyes closed and his arms crossed. Trey said, "Look, buddy, I know I just caught you, but I could really use you in this battle. Can you please help me?" Poliwhirl looked at Trey and nodded. Trey said, "Thanks, let's do this." Before we walked in, I grabbed Trey's shoulder and said, "At least use my Weepinbell. Grass types are water Pokemon's weakness." Trey said, "My Pokemon can handle it." Then he looked at the butler. The butler shrugged his shoulders and opened the door. The gym had a huge pool with floating platforms. There were 2 bleachers at each side of the pool. The ceiling was a huge window used to let in the sun in. There was always people sitting in the bleachers, some of my dad's students, others trainers, or just some of my dad's fans. I saw Terrence sitting with his Slowpoke in the stands. I sat next to him. He looked surprised to see me. "You're not battling your father?" I said, "No, I'm saving him for last." Terrence said, "I've always wanted to watch your father battle." I said, "Well, you still won't. This battle will be over soon." Terrence smiled and said, "Yeah, what was Trey thinking?" I shrugged my shoulders. My dad stood on one side of the gym as Trey stood on the other. My dad said, "Hey, kid, I don't want to embarrass you. It's not too late to back out." Trey said, "Never. I'm going to win. Let's do this." My dad shrugged his shoulders and nodded for the butler to go ahead. The butler held two flags. A red flag that was toward my father's, the gym leader, and the green flag pointed to Trey, the challenger. The butler said this is a 3-on-3 Pokemon battle. Only the challenger is allowed to return Pokemon and at will. The first to have all Pokemon unable to battle loses the battle. The butler raised the flags and yelled, "Begin!" Trey said, "Okay, Poliwhirl, I choose you." My father said, "A Poliwhirl, huh? Okay, let's go, Starmie." Trey pulled out his Pokedex and it said Starmie, the mysterious Pokemon. Its central core glows with the 7 colors of the rainbow. Some people value the core as a gem. Trey said, "Well, that was no help." My dad said, Are you ready?" Trey nodded. He pointed and said, "Okay, Poliwhirl, use Double Slap, go." My dad said, "Too easy, Starmie. Dodge it and use Rapid Spin." As Poliwhirl came at full speed, Starmie hit him back with Rapid Spin. Sweat came down Trey's face. I could tell he was losing it. Trey said, "Poliwhirl, are you okay?" Poliwhirl got up, still standing. Trey said, "Okay, Poliwhirl, use Body Slam." My dad smiled and said, "Starmie, use Rapid Spin again." Trey said, "Poliwhirl, let Starmie get close." My dad was shocked. As Starmie got close, Poliwhirl jumped up and used Body Slam on Starmie. Then Trey yelled, "Now, use Double Slap, go!" Every slap hit Starmie. My dad yelled, "Quick, get under the water." Starmie got up and dove into the water. My dad had his arms crossed and said, "Well, I'm impressed for this being your first battle, but it's over now." Poliwhirl stood his ground but kept getting blown back by my dad, Starmie. Poliwhirl wasn't even being able to stand barely anymore. Before Trey could say anything, there was a huge explosion in the gym. All of the guests ran out terrified. My dad yelled, "What is this?" Out of the smoke emerged 3 figures, 2 taller ones and a short one. My dad yelled, "Show yourself!" The smoke cleared. There stood a blonde-headed man with a black-haired woman wearing black shirts and a black pants with a big R on the chest. Standing at their feet, a Abra. My dad snarled, "Team Rocket." The woman said, "You are correct, sir, and we heard you have a shiny Cloyster." The butler said, "No, not my Cloyster." I hopped down from the seat. I asked Dad, "Who are these clowns?" My dad said, "They are Team Rocket. They steal Pokemon and use them for evil. They have been wanting my Gyarados for years." The man said, "And we will get that too. Beedrill, go now." The woman said, "Venomoth, you go too." My dad returned Starmie and was about to choose another Pokemon out. I looked at him and said, "Me and Trey got this. Go take care of the other Pokemon." My dad nodded. Terrence and the butler and my dad ran to the back. The woman looked at me and Trey and said, "Ah, look, leave it to the kids to save the day." Then she laughed. The Abra started talking as it said, "Bonnie, why does that boy look just like you?" She looked at Trey, then said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I looked at Trey and said, "You ready to take these clowns?" Trey looked at me and nodded. The man said, "Who are you calling clowns?" "We will show you." He looked at Abra and said, "Turn it on." Abra held a remote and said, "Suction on." A huge hose came out of the truck. They were standing on and went into a tank. Trey said, "I don't think so. Charmander, go. Use Ember now." I said, "Let's go, Eevee. Tentacle, help out with Swift and Poison Sting." All 3 moves hit the Beedrill and Venomoth back at Team Rocket. The Abra said, "Let's go. We got the Cloyster." The hose showed Cloyster go through the truck, but it got stuck. The lady said, "What's going on, Abra?" Abra said, "It's stuck." Henry said, "Well, get it unstuck." The Abra kept on pushing the button. I said, "I'll help you, Eevee. Use Swift on the hose." This time, Eevee cut the hose as it fell. Trey said, "Now, Charmander, use Ember now." Team Rocket braced themselves, but the attack missed them. The lady said, "Ha ha ha ha, brat, you missed." Trey, with his arms crossed, said, "Whatever you say." Abra sounded concerned and said, Bonnie, Bonnie said, "What?" Albert pointed down and the Ember attack was near the gas. In panic, Team Rocket grabbed each other, scared. The truck exploded and they went flying in the air, screaming, "We are so fired!" As the ding went into the sky, my dad and Butler came back at that time. The Butler jumped into the water to comfort his shiny cloister. My dad said, "Well, I'm impressed with both of you." The Butler with his cloister said, "I don't know. They keep trying to steal my cloister. He only opens up for me." He knocked on the cloister shell 3 times in a pattern, and it opened up. My dad said, "Well, Trey, Team Rocket have ruined our battle, but I do believe you deserve this." My dad pulled out a gym badge and gave it to him. Trey said, "Really? You are being serious?" My dad laughed and said, "Yes, you deserve it." Trey looked at me and said, "I told you I could do it." Terrence ran and said, "All the water Pokemon are safe now. What did I miss?" My dad looked at me and said, "Son, I believe you deserve this too." I said, "No, Dad. I want you to be the last person I face." Then I looked at Trey and said, "And you was about to lose your first Pokemon in the first round." My dad said, "Isaiah, calm down." I said, "Whatever. Let's go." And I started walking out with Trey and Terrence behind me. Trey asked, "What is your problem?" I didn't say anything. In my mind, my dad was wrong for giving Trey the badge, but I didn't want to say anything. Trey disregarded me and started chanting, "I got a badge, I got a badge." Terrence said, "Wait, how did Trey get a badge, but Isaiah didn't?" Terrence made me laugh, and Trey got quiet and said, "Shut up." And as you can see at the end of all my videos, I will show you what is new about our characters. As you can see, my character got a tentacle, Trey got a gym badge, and a Poliwhirl, as Terrence has still stayed the same. Thank you for listening and watching, you guys, and I'll put a next one up whenever I have the time. Thank you, and goodbye.